Greetings, gentlemen. You might be curious as to why you're seeing my face on your screen, why I'm bothering to do this at all. Well, if you are Rennie and Horst, you might know that with my extra time, I've decided to give myself a few projects, one of which, as you can see by the channel, there are several sub-channels, and every single fantasy football league that I run, not that I'm just in, but I run, I've been doing weekly recaps, and I've been having a good time with them. So I thought for basketball, it's a bit more of a laid-back league. I think that's why we all like it. You have to care for about a week while we make our picks, and then care again for a couple days when we do our mid-season all-star break adjustments. And then you either get money or you don't, but it's kind of nice to put something on the line. Anyway, I thought that was with that in mind, we don't necessarily need weekly recaps, but why not chime in during big parts of the season or when points may or may not change? So this is more of a setup since we haven't done one yet. I'll go over some of the things that we picked, remind you effectively who you picked if you haven't been keeping track. But this comes at a really interesting time. Now, you're going to notice a little costume change here in a bit. I did a little piece last week where I just went over some of the teams. Most of them still apply, so I kept it. And I just didn't have time to put things together on the weekend. And what effectively just happened, I'm recording this part. So while I recorded the other part last Friday, this part's on the 29th, so it's the day after the round robin of the in-season tournament came in, and I thought this was a good time to check in. Now we know our 8. We're about a week or two away, a week and a half away from the player of the month being announced in November, so when I check in again in about a week and a half to 2 weeks' time, there will actually be some points on the board. So this is kind of our leveling starting point where we know where you can just start to see how things are shaking out. So hope you enjoy. Even if you don't, I'm probably going to do this anyway, even though I can actually see views, and there's very few of us in the league, so I'll have an idea if people are watching it or not. I'll probably just keep going. I don't need much motivation. One person giving me one like or a subscribe, that's enough for me to just keep on rolling. Anyway, there's going to be enough of me rambling. Let's move on to some of the player or the team tiers as we get into looking at what our league might be looking like this year. Let's be honest. If you really want some in-depth analysis or team list, you can get them almost anywhere. I wanted to do it slightly differently. So instead of a ranking, let's do tiers. To be the man, you got to beat the man. Now, I'm sure a ton of people have said it. For whatever reason, I always think of Ric Flair, but I'm sure other people said it beforehand. Now, this is an odd one because you'd think then I'd go with just the 2 East and West champions from last year. Close. Nuggets, yes, this is their category. And I think even though right now, by the time of taping, it is Thursday, November 23rd, the Nuggets are technically not first in the West. I think most would still have them as the favorite. In fact, Vegas does have them as the favorite, or at least FanDuel, as I'm looking up. I know there's a lot of sports books. Instead of the Heat, though, I'd put the Celtics. Now, why? Since they haven't been the man in the past, they've always been an Eastern Conference staple. I still think the Eastern Conference championship runs through them. You might argue Bucks, you might argue 76ers, and you might argue Heat. I'm saying Celts. I think they're actually statistically the best team in the league, at least in the East. We'll see about the Nuggets later on. But hey, what do I know? Anyway, it's a 2-person category. Those are the 2 teams I picked. Dennis Green said it years ago. I used it a couple weeks ago for my football pool, but they were who we thought they were. So these teams are what they thought they were, but the good side of that. We're going to get to a tier later where it's kind of the teams we thought they'd be, but not in a great way. Here I threw in 5 teams: 76ers, Heat, Bucks, Kings, and Suns. And a week ago when I made this list, the Suns were not in this tier. They actually moved up. They've had a good last week. KD is playing out of his freaking mind. I know a lot of us that are getting old, and now when we wake up, our hips are a little sore, IT band's a little tighter. So we're a little worried about Kevin Durant, his legs, his arms, his body in general. He's way getting overplayed by the Suns because they're having other health issues. But if they're doing this with one of their cogs working, Booker's just kind of getting back into the swings. We haven't seen what Beal's going to do on this team yet. I had to put him in this category. Bucks as well started off kind of with a snag. Turns out it's Amy and Lillard. There's no D there, but his pick and roll with Giannis is unbelievable. So as long as they can just keep outscoring teams, they don't have to worry about defense. They're fine. 76ers started off hot. They've stayed hot. Kings, I think it depends on your expectations. Some people thought they'd slide this year. I think a lot of us thought that they'd be strong. I think Shea in particular, and they're here. And the Heat, again, they're the defending champs. You got to give them some credit. So this is the tier I thought that worked best for them. Now, I fully get that doesn't make sense, Happy Gilmore, but remember when he makes the putt and oh, it's magic comes on. I know it's not the name of the song, and I could have just said the song itself, but for this tier, it's more things have just gone magically at the start. And it's not just the Magic I put in this tier, it's also the Thunder and the Timberwolves. 3 teams that I think some people thought might be upstarts. A lot of hype in the preseason, but this hype was more like, wow, they could make the playoffs, or maybe they could be that tough team in the playoffs. Not what they're doing right now. All 3 are having fantastic games, putting up tough fights against tough teams, getting huge wins both home and on the road, and even in their little tournament, which we will talk about in a little bit. I had to put these in a separate category. They are surprises, but even more than surprises, I think they're even a tier above what most expected them to be this year. When I say Taylor Swift Relationship Award, it's just that it's too good to be true, and we've seen this before. Now, this is like the last tier where they're overachieving, but we're kind of starting to see what they are. I put the Rockets here because they took off, for lack of a better term. Great coaching, great structure, a lot of talent, but I think the reality of the West will slowly start to bring them down, but I could be wrong. And then the Pacers, super fun. That's why I took them. But I think we know how this ends. If they just keep their run and gun, they're going to be the most fun team to watch. But I got to see how they line up once things get a little bit more physical. So the tournament, lucky enough, I think one of the beautiful things, Doc Gordon, a podcast I listened to, did mention recently that one of the best things about the tournament is it actually gives coaches a chance to play with their tight 6 or tight 7 or tight 8, depending on what they want to go for the playoffs. They actually can see how they react in certain situations. And I do think we're starting to see that. I think we'll see that more in the knockout rounds. So I reserve the right to move these teams up or down depending, but this is where they are right now for me. Much like a father who's pretending to maybe read or watch something on TV to keep themselves awake while their daughter or son is out on a date, they're not worried, but they're paying attention. For these, I put the 2 old guns. We got the Warriors and the Lakers, and I realize the irony of putting 2 teams that I picked back to back in a tier on their own. This is because I think both of them have shown why they can be great, but both of them have shown pretty fatal flaws. And I don't know, we're not worried, are we? But we're kind of getting worried. At the same time, I think later on in the year, I would call this the team that you don't want to bump into in a playoff because they, 4 out of 7, they can be quite tough. But I think with the Lakers, it's always going to be injury-based. LeBron has actually looked incredible. Just the rest of his team is still trying to sort it out. Davis has had games, and we'll get to him in a minute when we talk about awards, because in stats and awards, he's around the circle, especially some statistical things. But, I mean, he's already left once with, like, a sore groin spasm. I'm not going to make any jokes there as to maybe lose a YouTube standing, but they got to gel more. But this was the same thing last year. They actually started off horrible, and they came together as a team. So, again, we're not worried. The Warriors, we've seen this story play out. Curry's playing out of his mind, but no one else is, right? They're really banking on Wiggins kind of stepping up. Draymond Green's more interested in selling his podcast himself and maybe getting some last pot shots into people that he wanted to choke out for years. And Klay has had such a bad start. I don't know, is this just who he is? Is he just older and he's not going to hit the percentages he did before, or is something wrong? Super interesting career. I'd love to talk about Klay a little bit more because, I mean, for someone who really hasn't been where we thought they'd be since he got hurt, is going to ask for a huge contract. Do the Warriors keep them out of legacy because you talk to Draymond, the 3 of them will have a statue outside of the stadium and they will be celebrated for years. And they did bring upon a dynasty. So do you honor that and keep them? Or, I mean, if you're playing too much like a statue already, that's kind of an issue, and both of them are. So will that change? Will it snap out of it? And again, would you want to play them in the playoffs? I mean, I wouldn't want to play Curry in pretty much anything. So right now, this is where they sit. Now, don't just assume you know this. Spice Girls wannabe. It is not for maybe the line you think it is. It's not because they tell me what they want, what they really, really want. But it's more a throwaway line later on where they say, are you for real? These are some teams that are starting to, they've had moments where they really peaked for a bit. In one case, they actually climbed almost the top of the division, and now they're kind of settling, but they're not going too low. They're still playoff. I put the Hawks, I put the Knicks, and I put the Mavs in this one. Are they for real? Can they be this contender? Again, I think we see some flaws, but they're actually playing pretty well when things are going well. They're not super dependent on too many gimmicks, depending on how gimmicky you think Luka is. Although I love that he's starting to call bank in Serbian. That's just something to keep your eye on. That's fantastic. So I had them in their own separate tier. They are a little bit better than expected, or on the upper end of what people expected, and they could be very much for real, and this could be their spot. So they get their own tier. Now, these are not done in order, as you may have kind of caught on. I'm not going best to worst. The tiers are kind of in a way that makes sense to me. So there are a couple teams that I would say are better than these teams coming up, but they follow a pattern, so I'm going to put them aside. So this one is the Beige Curtains. They're a team. They can be good to watch. They've had their highs already, their lows, but their highs haven't been super high and their lows haven't been lower than we really expect. For here I put the Nets, the Raptors, the Pelicans, and the Jazz. You might have an issue with that. The Nets were in the playoffs up until about last week, but that's about where they're going to be. They're going to be on the cusp, fighting for maybe the sixth at best, but probably a play-in team, but could dip below the play-in bar depending on some of the other teams. Raptors I'd put in the same category. Pelicans look good, and I think they probably have the highest ceiling of this tier in some cases, when healthy. And I think that's the big thing is they haven't shown us in the past couple of years they can play for more than a month without something crazy happening. And the Jazz are doing pretty poorly, but not horribly, enough that I think they earn this tier instead of like the bottom tier. But they're not great, and they're not supposed to be. All right, next three are our panic signals. Each have one team, and they're different levels of panic. This one is just you're checking in on a friend. Like, you all right? You sure? I got to put the Cavs here. They were a little lower last week, and they're starting to come up a little bit, but they've kind of been toying around. They haven't looked like a fluid unit yet. There's already some trade talks in some cases, but when they play, they're good. And remember, they were a top seed in the last year. Like they could come back and be a force in the East, and many people think that they will. So the lightest level of panic is in they could tank, but just to check in on the friend. You all right? Second level of panic, and I would actually give this the famous quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world," because that is such an overused quote. I really despise when people use it. I get it. It makes sense. But this is the overplayed story of the year. I'm so tired as soon as it comes on already. That's the James Harden story. He gets what he wants. He goes to the Clippers, and they got to be the second tier of panic. And Shea, don't get too mad yet, because I actually think it's panic, but if you're the kind of person who likes to put money on things, you check the odds every once in a while. Well, what would be the odd that they made the Western Final, or they even won the Western Final? Because the thing is, you're going to get insane odds, and it's probably not going to happen. But that's why you get insane odds, because they do have the talent that if they ever figured out how to take 5 ball-hungry people, because I do include Norman Powell, he's better when he has control over the ball. If you can find a way to make them happy, I mean, Leonard is going to do what he does, and now that Popovich is standing up for him so he doesn't get booed in the Spurs arena, kind of a cool story. If you haven't seen that, go take a quick look. I mean, there is a lot of talent here, right? And it's not like they can't do it. It's just they probably won't, and I'm just tired of hearing about them. All right, the third level of panic. This is the most extreme. This is the cold sore at an orgy. Just don't touch me. I don't want anything to do with you. Keep your distance. This is the Memphis Grizzlies. I don't even know what's happening here. Do they know that the season has started? I know, obviously, Ja's out for the 25, but by the time, I mean, I think they were hoping they could at least be close to 500 by then, and they pretty much have to win out to do that. So, rough start. Things might change, but I don't want anything to do with them. Our last 6, and I did have to add one team, sadly, and when I made this list last week, these are the dig up stupids. This is the race to the bottom. They're not tanking because some of them just don't need to tank. They're just not as good. And I do think 1 or 2 of these teams have the ability to play themselves out of it. This is the Spurs, the Trailblazers, the Pistons, the Wizards, the Hornets, and I added the Bulls, sadly. I mean, I wasn't going to. They were doing okay, but they've already had a non-optional player called team meeting. That ain't good. Hornets, I think, also have the ability to pop out of this. I just don't see it consistently again. And And the rest, I mean, Wizards are just a horrible watch. I'll get to them a little bit more when I tell my story of why I took who I took. Pistons, I actually do think have a lot of talent. It's just whether they're going to put it together. The Trailblazers are definitely made for the future, but not for this year. And the Spurs, if they got a point guard, they'd actually be about 10 times better. I don't know if you're watching much of Wemby. If you're a basketball fan, you're at least keeping up with it. It is painful. He's great. He's fine. Get the man a point guard and get it now, and you will be twice as good, which makes me think that they're doing things for a reason. And Popovich, I think we normally trust. So these are the teams right now. If you have on your roster, you're sweating because you might get the negative points. Well, big picture, it's good to look at what's actually happening in the NBA so we can follow along because that's actually the point. It's good for us also to remind ourselves occasionally who actually we took and what we should be cheering for. So in this part, I'm just going to go player by player and remind you who you took and maybe where they stand in terms of some of the rankings if you're not paying attention. So while I know we're going to start with players and I technically got the first pick for players, I will talk about that in a second. I'm going to start with our friend Chainer here because he got the first pick in team, so I put him first in the column. And, why would I not follow order? We're not heathens after all. So here's Chainer's quick breakdown. You will notice that I've actually taken and copy and pasted the players from the picks page onto the players. This is the spreadsheet that is shared with us, so we all have access. All information is above level. Anyway, for you, Chainer, you did get the fifth pick, which, you got the reigning MVP in the fifth pick around the end. So just taking a look at your team here, I'm going to go through some of the awards. So right now, you got to be happy that Embiid, your fifth pick overall, is actually the league leader in points. That's about it, though. He does have some other credentials. He's fifth in rebounds. He's up there for his third in MVP voting. And by the way, I'm doing for odds on that. I'm looking at FanDuel, and they just obviously that's has nothing to do with who will win these awards. But when I say first, second, third, that's what I'm talking about. Whereas the points, rebounds, assists, the stats, that's actual tangible numbers. So Embiid's looking pretty good. And obviously, if you're up in MVP voting, you do have the chance of all team or first team, second team, all NBA. I think the nice thing this year, well, maybe nice or not, we can get in discussion about that later, is they're trying to not make it as positional. So technically, Embiid and Jokic could make the first team, whereas before only one of the two of them could. Let's see how that breaks down. For other ones, you've got Mitchell. You got to be pretty happy with the fact that he's second right now in steals. He's fourth in odds for clutch. Don't know if you were tracking that one. Fox is third in clutch. So Chainer, you just might have drafted the clutch award. But I think your biggest thing, we can talk about Tatum. He's not getting much buzz. He is on the MVP ballot in terms of, I think he's fourth right now in odds for MVP voting, but he's not really leading any statistical category, but he's getting a lot of buzz for things like first or second team, all NBA with his play. And obviously as Boston goes, so does he. Zion, not getting a lot of love, but could because the Pelicans are rising. If that happens, his stock will go up. People like Jaylen Brown not getting a lot of buzz. I think the biggest thing, the steal possibly of the entire draft, Rudy Gobert, you took him with your last pick or the fifth last overall. Currently right now, he is fourth in rebounds, fourth in blocks, but he's the leader odds-wise for Defensive Player of the Year, which would obviously put him on an all-defensive team. So that's pretty special. It looks like he's come back. So while the other guys, you're going to have to wait and see who kind of rises and falls, you certainly got a lot of points to be happy about right off the bat. Shea, you got a little bit of a different vibe when we look at your picks. Now, Curry and Booker are getting love for people in the first three, first, second, or third team All-NBA. So I'd be shocked if they weren't getting mentioned in terms of possible points there. But in terms of stats, they're not really up on anything. Booker, though, sixth right now in odds for clutch. So you got something. For you, though, you don't have a whole lot, to be honest, on the leaderboard for statistics. Mobley is third right now in Defensive Player of the Year. But you do have people like Ant-Man, the pre-mentioned Mobley, like I say, Booker, Curry. They are getting some love for some of the first or second or third teams and both offensive or defensive or all NBA or defensive NBA. I think the other one too, Holiday, don't forget, he often gets Teammate of the Year award. There's no odds really for that one because I don't think anyone really knows how that's decided. But you've got some intangibles there. Now, I think the biggest thing that I would point out is maybe a bust for you, Scoot Henderson. There's another rookie that we're going to talk about in the forgotten pile that is actually maybe ahead of where some people thought he could be. Maybe you thought that was Scoot. Guards take a while to get into it, though. So will he grow into his team? And as Portland kind of hits a little bit of a, they've beaten a couple decent teams in the last couple weeks, maybe he'll be more of a part of it. I think coming from the G League didn't quite prepare him as much as some people thought, or maybe starting in that documentary if you saw that before the season started. But anywho, you do have some ways to move here, and I do think some of your guys will pay off, but you might not be someone who's mentioned in the statistics category. You might just be going for people who might win Player of the Month. Randy, I don't think you're aware of this, but lots of pressure. I do believe every single league winner has had the third pick. Granted, this is only the third year we're doing that, but still, the last two winners came from the third, so lots to talk about with you. Your big guy, Luka, he was the third overall pick. He's third in points, second for MVP votes, fourth for clutch, so that also puts him on the roster for the All-NBA. I'd say Davis ended up being so far, maybe, if he's staying healthy. He does have the groin issue that he went out with, but he's still fine, and he got past it. He's second, I believe, in rebounds, second in blocks, and second in Defensive Player of the Year. So obviously there you've got someone who could get you some points, especially on the defensive end, and that would pretty much put him in line for all defensive, all NBA teams. Sabonis, you got in third in rebounds, Defensive Player of the Year. You've got Jaren Jackson Jr., who's currently in the fifth spot. And Lillard, didn't know if you knew this, but he's currently the favorite for the Clutch Award. Again, I don't really know if we know what that means, but it means something. You also do have someone like, Leonard, that if the Clippers go off, he would be a Player of the Month candidate. Garland's not getting a whole lot of mentioned, and you got to say Jimmy Butler. I mean, he's, again, someone that any month could go off, but also could work his way onto the All-NBA teams. So let's see how that pans out for you, because, again, a lot of pressure, Rennie. Third spot. You got to be the favorite. Horst, you probably got a steal that most people would have assumed if I got first pick, I should have taken Joker. He is the best player in the league. I have no qualms about that, and I probably regret it a bit. I just always assume he doesn't care about awards, so I just figured if it didn't benefit him, he wouldn't push for it. But of course, he's phenomenal. So he is our league leader in rebounds, not in points, surprisingly. He's fourth in assists. Don't know if you meant that. He is the current favorite to win MVP, which obviously you got to be pretty happy about that. And just in general, he's pretty much a guaranteed for either first or second All-NBA. Like I said, with the Embiid comment, the center thing has held them back before, but that might not exist. I know not all sports writers who do vote on these awards, I don't know if you're aware of that, not all of them are for it, so I think some will go by that, some won't, so we'll actually see what happens there. LeBron's not up for any awards right now, but he's playing phenomenal, so it wouldn't shock me if he squeezed out a Player of the Month, and certainly if the Lakers push, him getting on a first, second, or third All-NBA team, very realistic. You got KD, who's currently second in points, and not by that much. I think Embiid's right now averaging 32, whereas KD's 31.4, so as long as he stays healthy, he's been a monster. Murray's got some issues with injury, but, keep an eye on him. Bam is currently fourth in the odds for Defensive Player of the Year. And then your under guys, we'll see how it goes, right? I mean, I think Siakam, there's a trade potential if Toronto continues on the path that they're in. Bridges and Markkanen, we'll see how they kind of pan out. Markkanen had a late stretch last year that kind of helped him out, so who knows? But your top 4 or 5 look like they could be point getters. And again, who knows how these Player of the Months are decided. So with the Joker, I mean, you're not going to fall that far. You should be getting some points from your player side. For me, obviously, I could ramble on about my own team, and everybody would be super glued to it, and everyone cares what someone thinks about their own team. With that in mind, I'll be pretty quick. I would say the shock. I mean, I did take Giannis because I think every single year he's one of the few people that could win an MVP and a defensive MVP. I didn't actually think he'd win MVP. I mean, Joker, like I said, it's got to be the favorite, but I just have to assume that since he doesn't care, sometimes there is that lobbying for it. Anyway, Giannis is fifth in points, and as the Bucks start to play better and better, that might climb even more. Surprisingly, though, he's not really made much of an impact on blocks and rebounds. I was kind of hoping he would, so that might be gone. However, I do have some late people that might be saving me. SGA is probably being one of the biggest ones. He's fourth in points. He's first in steals. He's sixth in MVP votes, and second for the Clutch Award. Again, those are odds, but that's pretty good for a guy I got second. Wemby, here's the thing. He's actually currently tied, if not second, for Rookie of the Year odds, but he is third in blocks, and he just made the quote that this is the worst we're ever going to see him, and he's just going to get better and better. Halliburton I would put down as another steal. I'm pretty happy about him. He is first in assists and sixth currently in most improved odds. So keep your eye on that one as Indiana climbs, which we'll talk about Indiana in just a second. I think I'm pretty happy with that. And Trae Young, yeah, I was fishing for assists. He's second in assists. Currently, I have top 2. I was kind of hoping Chris Paul would make a run for like most improved or sixth man, but not really looking like that so far. And certainly, I think if we're going to make fun of anybody, I need to tell a quick story about Jordan Poole. This is for anyone who is actually, Rennie would have been the only one in this league. It's kind of the Trubisky effect, as I call it for myself. And effectively, I'll tell the short version. I know that's not my forte. Heading into an NFL draft, I had this strategy, draft quarterbacks late. This is about 3 years ago, by the way. And I had a couple people in mind. And then I just saw this thing, like literally read an article the morning of and heard a little accompanying thing about how it's Trubisky's year with the Bears and how, he can move his feet and he can get points and fantasy darling and all this stuff. And then I think we all know what happened there. I did take him really late, thought it was a steal of the draft. I think I dropped him by week 4 or week 5, but he was in that like, can't drop him, can't anyway. I think you know where I'm going with this. There's actually 3 people I was going to take instead of Poole. One would have been another bust. The other 2 are people that, one in particular was the one I probably would have leaned towards, and he is someone who should have gotten some love, and he will be on my honorable mentions list in a second. But if you got points for people who chucked a shot off the side of the backboard but talk crap to the bench about it, I mean, I'd be getting points for that, so shove it. Speaking of which, before we go on to teams, just some honorable mentions, some people who are up in points or up in the stats and possibly some of these categories but have not been taken. Van Fleet is in the top 5 for assists. So is Ball, but I think he just got hurt. Paul George, Suggs, and actually Herb Jones are 3, 4, and 5 when it comes to steals. So there's some people there if FGA and Mitchell bail out. Lopez is actually first in blocks, so that's actually guaranteed points, and he's 6th in Defensive Player of the Year, which might put him in a chance for an all-defensive team, so he could be a pickup. The guy I was alluding to before, not a guy I was going to take, but I was going to take him if Wemby went off the board. Chet's coming out. He's first or tied with first for Rookie of the Year votes, and he's 5th in blocks right now. So that extra year, gained a little bit of weight. Maybe that helps him out. Not so sure. Anyway, now that we've looked more at our players, let's look not just at our teams, but don't know if you're paying attention, but the in-season tournament's happening, and it's going to have an impact. As I mentioned, I finally set up our little templates here. You'll notice the color coding. Now, in the past, I've always color coded with these nice fancy colors. I will still do that. It really helps me with the adding and subtracting and everything, but that'll be on the teams. So I'm going to leave these here, and I'm going to have the more subdued colors go over the point. So as you can see, I've already blocked out. Now that we know for sure, and up on the screen right now, we got our in-season tournament. Looking good. We got our final 8. It's down to our quarterfinals. You'll notice right now I'm recording this on the 29th of November. I keep saying dates because obviously that's going to swing things. Hopefully I'll have this out within the next day or 2, but let's see how it goes. I want to get this out before the quarterfinal happens, and if you are looking at the stats, here's just a breakdown. Not stats, but actually schedule. So this is the Monday games. Okay, and these are the Tuesday games. We've got one from the East, one from the West. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and just kind of a breakdown of something else in just a second. But we look here, we got the Celtics and Pacers, Pelicans and Kings, and then Knicks and Bucks, Suns and Lakers. Once that becomes more refined, I will put in, because obviously you get the point just by making the tournament. So if you lose that game, it's still 1 point. If you make it to the semis, you can see the little chart here. So looking at our teams, everyone's got a dog in the fight right now. And what would you rather have? One of the top seeds? I mean, Bucks and Celtics were looking pretty good. Kings just handled the Warriors in a really intense game, which was wonderful to see. In fact, I think that's probably one of the selling points for the in-season tournament. But again, I'm going to save that for a side rant. Horst is the league leader, though. He's got 3 teams with a chance. So worst case scenario, he's going to walk away with 3 points. But if someone else takes it down, then he's not necessarily going to be the point leader for teams coming out of this, but it's extremely likely he'll probably have more points in the team category. Do remember, though, by the time they go up, it is likely to also have player of the month. So let's see how that goes. Already pretty exciting. I'd say just some adds and steals here. Rennie, well done on the Timberwolves. I mean, they're not going to get you a point now. And the Magic, that's 2 teams that are monsters, as I mentioned in the team recap. Well done there. I think even your Hornets pick, I don't think right now you're in massive danger of losing points. So aside from the fact that you've got some, it's a team like the Cavs that's underachieving. Hey, like I said, third's won for a reason. Chainer, I think you got to be happy with the Bucks, and essentially your all East plan might be working out. I'm not really sure. It does guarantee you some points because you're definitely going to have some playoff teams, but the Pistons one, they're not looking good. I'm not going to lie to you. I would have loved it if I were you. Shea took the Wizards. I thought the Wizards were going to be the worst in the East. They still might be, but I'd be scared of the Pistons right now. Speaking of Shea, I think probably the thing you're kicking yourself for is taking the Spurs when you still had teams like the Magic and the Rockets still as availability for you. You did get allocated the Clippers, and I'm not going to lie to you, I am not a fan of the Clippers, but it doesn't look that bad for them. So you got to be feeling pretty happy. And as I mentioned, you got the Nuggets, who are the favorites, and Kings and Thunder have been doing what you thought they would do. So well done by you. I know for sure you were pumped about that one. Horst, you just got saddled with the Grizzlies, bud. You took them second, and that is just stinging you. Everyone else, the Pelicans, obviously that's going to be a steal, and the Knicks are overperforming. So really, you just got to hope that the Blazers climb out, and they are not the basement in the West, and that the Grizzlies, when Morant comes back, that they remove surgically their head from their ass. But maybe that will feel a little bit better now that it looks like you're going to get some points from the in-season tournament. For me, I'm not really upset with my first two picks. There were two teams I didn't expect to have a phenomenal regular season. Warriors, though, I'm a little bit worried about the temper tantrums right now. That's not something I signed up for. But if they can just kind of get into the playoffs, I think both of those teams I'm happy with. The Bulls, I didn't really want them anyway. I just wanted them more than I wanted the other teams. Super pumped about the Pacers, super pumped about the Rockets. So I can't really have too many objections there. So we know where we stand. I think just taking a look as this moves forward, I think month by month we'll get a better idea. But for now, make sure we're paying attention to the in-season tournament. It made basketball in November/December actually fun. Before signing off on this first one, I wanted to give my 2 cents, but given my rambling ability, I probably feel more like 3.5 to 4 cents. And since this is kind of an interesting time to check in, we don't have any points on the board yet, but just as more of an NBA check-in, we're kind of getting a sense of how the in-season tournament might be working. Now, I'm as skeptical as anybody else, and I really didn't know how I'd feel about it coming into it. It seemed like an odd thing just to throw at the beginning. But I am a baseball fan, and I'm used to things taking so long to evolve. I mean, it took baseball how many years to realize that people don't necessarily want to watch a pitcher scratch his nards for like a minute before each pitch. And so they're starting to try and make some changes. Basketball's always been a bit more progressive in that sense, and in their shorter history, they've been a little bit more creative. So it doesn't surprise me that basketball is one of the ones who took a shot on this first to try and introduce something that I think they probably feel is a European model with the multiple cups and leagues as it goes on. But, I was thinking about this. It didn't really hit me. I have enjoyed it, just to get to my thesis first, and then I'll get to the why. I didn't really fully grasp maybe why I kind of enjoyed the in-season tournament so far, but when I kind of read a quick story on Paul George defending Russell Westbrook for snapping at a fan, and I mean, fair enough, fans can be asshats, and I get it, people can go over the line, but then he throws out the comment, the how many other jobs in the world do you actually have to face this kind of firsthand criticism and deal with people telling you that you're doing a horrible job? It goes to show the player connection with the average person can sometimes be quite large. Clearly, Paul George has never worked in the service industry in his life. We used to not only have to deal with the negative comments, but we actually had procedures in place, not for if, but for when someone got their ass grabbed or got physically touched by customers, because it does tend to happen in these types of places. And I worked in a fairly classy place as it goes through. So no, I don't think Paul George has a good handle on things. But this is part of the problem, right? Is normally these are the stories that we actually talk about. The James Harden, throwing an attitude and how things are adjusting. Because with 24-hour sports, we have to make up our own storylines that they end up being so far removed from the actual game itself that sometimes it can be frustrating. So what I love about this is I can't remember a time in late November, early December when we actually were talking about basketball in a more tactical sense. We actually get a sense to see. I mean, I think we figured it out. 82 games are just too long for the players. That's why they load manage. That's why, I get it, but remember back in the day, Steve Nash having to take vitamin supplements because he tried too hard in the regular season? You just can't go at that pace and that tempo all the time. So there ends up being these lulls. And then you get the other perspective. Why would people want to come see a game and bring their kids or spend all this money if they may or may not actually see the people they came and played to see? So we've got that kind of an issue. And this isn't going to solve that. But what it effectively at least allowed us to do is see which teams cared about this tournament and which didn't. I mean, Denver, I would still think is the best team in the league, but they clearly did not care. They actually rested some players during in-season tournament games. Maybe they're viewing it. They don't want remember, most of these games will count as regular season games, but I believe the semifinal, but definitely the final, does not. It doesn't count towards statistics. It doesn't count towards your record. These are extra games. So if you're a team that's a little bit older, I'm shocked the Lakers actually cared as much as they did. If you're trying to rest players, you don't really want to be in the final. I mean, the 500,000, it's cool, but it does give us a sense, like, think how much this means to a team like Indiana, right? Or even Phoenix that has never really gotten there, but they're trying to show that they could be there. Now they're going to get to hang it on their hat. Like them, Pacers and the Knicks are going to say, hey, we're top 4 in the East, even though I don't think they actually are. So this is kind of a cool idea that it gives us a sense of who cares. And I think I said earlier in the video, Doc Rivers' point about seeing how a coach can hammer out his lineups and see who the top 7 or 8 guys are and what rotations work and which ones don't. I think that's amazing. But what it really comes down to is basketball is a sport that you have to try hard to play for it to be good. I mean, I would prefer the talent in the NBA, but as most of you know from me, I love college basketball, even though it's run by corrupt people that incredibly do not care about the people that actually are sacrificing their bodies for the sport, and I think we'll see that's a whole other rant and a whole other day, but I love it because they have to care. I should probably start some kind of a book or series where I go through my experiences and I drop a quote or an argument and you have to guess whether or not it's drunk people that I was bartending for or high school kids who are arguing, because they're actually quite similar, but that argument of what sport creates the best athletes, it's such a ridiculous one. You always get the people chiming in, well, football/soccer. Remember, I teach on this side of the pond. It goes by football here. They can run forever and they have to be in awesome shape. And then the rugby people chime in. It's like, yeah, we're in that kind of shape. Plus we get punched in the face. Swimmers always have a weird perspective on this because they can't really, some people would drown and die in their field of play. So it's kind of hard to compare. But the one thing basketball always has going for it in that argument is the fact that it's high intensity, it's fast twitch. You got to be able to run really fast, or usually fast enough. You have to be quick enough to kind of guard if you play defense. Run the floor, jump as high as you can. It's pretty taxing, right? You can't play effectively a whole game, and you don't walk in a good basketball game. When the whistle blows, you're going, right? And maybe not you're sprinting the whole time, but it's tenuous. So to assume that a game this long with this many games, they just can't do that. So now we actually get to see in the middle of a season or budding of a season, people actually trying and playing good defense. And these are like phenomenal athletes who know the game so well. It's just going to produce better material, right? So it'll go back mid-December. We'll be talking about other things. People will question again whether the NBA could start in December and get away with it. And they could. They could cut 20 games off the season. But billionaires want to be billionairing and they don't want to drop in revenue, and players are not going to want their contracts to go down. So I can't see them slimming it down anytime soon. So if this is a happy medium where we get 5 or 6 extra games a year where people care and we get to see decent basketball, I guess I'm all for it. Maybe it's going to lead to load management as an increase in January and February when they care less. But right now, I'm happy. Talk to me then. Maybe I won't be. Anyway, though, again, that's my 3.5 to 4 cents. That's going to put an end to the first part, or the first chapter 1 of this particular video series, or following the league. Like I said, in a couple weeks, I'll probably chime in. If it works, maybe I'll do it once a month, because I kind of like the idea that after points change, we have our player of the month for both East and West that are coming up, plus the in-season tournament as it folds out in the next week. We're going to see who gets the points. We're going to see which teams kind of end up shaking in. I think there's also potentially, if I didn't read it incorrectly, I think there's supposed to be an MVP and an all-tournament team. So they'll announce that. I'll adjust the points. Then maybe I do a reaction video to kind of see and catch us up where we're at. Let me know if you like it, though, because, well, like I said, it might not matter. I might just do it anyway. But it's nice to get complimented occasionally on more than just, base level things. Anyway, that is more than enough for me. Hope you're all doing well. I'll see you next time.